In April 2011, the body of 34-year-old Evelyn Carter was discovered in the master bedroom of her home in Pinebrook, Ohio. The investigation that followed unraveled a chilling tale of betrayal, control, and a marriage that had been unraveling for months. Just 8 years earlier, in April 2005, Evelyn had married Jonathan Carter, a respected orthopedic surgeon. To outsiders, they seemed like the perfect couple, but beneath the surface, their relationship was crumbling under the weight of secrecy and obsession. In August 2010, at an exclusive gym in downtown Pinebrook, Evelyn met Daniel Reyes, a personal trainer, whose presence would unknowingly set a chain of events in motion, events that would ultimately end in bloodshed. On the quiet morning of April 6, 2011, as the first rays of sunlight touched the suburban streets of Pinebrook, Ohio, a sense of unease settled over Cedar Lane. The neighborhood, known for its perfectly trimmed lawns and peaceful atmosphere, was not the kind of place where police sirens shattered the silence. But that morning, they did. At exactly 6:42 a.m., a call came through to 911. The voice on the other end was hesitant, uncertain, but clear enough to describe what they had seen: a front door wide open for hours, unmoving curtains, and a feeling that something was terribly wrong inside the Carter residence. The two-story house at 42 Cedar Lane stood still, untouched by the movement of the world outside. When officers John Mason and Elena Ruiz pulled up to the driveway, the first thing they noticed was the eerie stillness. No movement inside, no sound, just an open door leading into the unknown. Stepping inside, the first room they saw was the living room. It was perfect, almost too perfect. The cream-colored couch sat untouched, a decorative throw blanket still folded neatly at the edge. A stack of magazines on the coffee table remained in place, undisturbed. A candle, unlit, rested beside them. There was no sign of struggle, no sign of panic, nothing to suggest the chaos that awaited upstairs. The kitchen, however, was different. There, on the counter, a half-finished glass of red wine stood next to an empty plate with a single fork resting on it. Evelyn Carter had been here last night. That much was certain. Had she been alone? Had she known what was coming? As the officers made their way up the spiral staircase, the air became heavier, the silence more unbearable. The hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit, and at the very end, the master bedroom door was slightly ajar. A single push was all it took to step into a nightmare. The first thing they saw was the shattered mirror. Tiny pieces of glass sparkled under the dim light, scattered across the floor like fallen stars. The second thing they saw was the blood. Dark, dried, soaking into the fibers of the cream-colored carpet. And then there was Evelyn Carter. She lay face down, one arm stretched toward the nightstand, fingers barely touching her phone, as if she had been trying to reach it in her final moments. The screen was cracked, the notification light blinking, 14 missed calls. The first one had come in at 1:07 a.m., the last at 3:42 a.m. Her body was partially covered by a silk bedsheet, draped as if someone had tried to conceal her, but the damage had already been done. A deep laceration ran from her temple to the back of her head, the kind of wound that could only be caused by something heavy, something forceful. The blood beneath her had dried hours ago. Her hands told a story of their own, scratches along her palms, tiny slivers of glass embedded in her skin. She had fought, she had struggled, and in the end, she had lost. The bedside lamp was missing, its base shattered against the wall, now just another piece of debris in the wreckage of the room. It hadn't just been thrown, it had been used. The placement of her body, the carefully arranged sheet, the lack of forced entry, this wasn't random. This was personal. By 7:15 a.m., forensic investigators arrived. Detective Mark Calloway, a seasoned investigator with 2 decades of experience, stood at the doorway, arms crossed, eyes scanning every detail. He had seen dozens of crime scenes, but something about this one unsettled him. The house wasn't ransacked. There were no missing valuables. Even Evelyn's wedding ring remained on her finger, glinting under the harsh light of the forensic team's flashlights. If this had been a burglary, it would have been messy, but this was clean, deliberate. By 8:30 a.m., Jonathan Carter had been contacted. When officers found him at Pine Brook Memorial Hospital, where he worked as an orthopedic surgeon, he was in the middle of a procedure. He seemed shocked when they told him the news. His hands, steady enough to perform delicate surgeries, shook as he was escorted into an office for questioning. By April 8, 2011, the investigation had gained momentum. The crime scene had been fully examined, evidence collected, and officers had begun piecing together the final hours of Evelyn Carter's life. Jonathan sat through hours of questioning, recounting his last moments with his wife, his voice low and unsteady. He told them he had been on a 36-hour shift, only coming home in the early hours of April 6th to find his wife murdered. But something about his story didn't sit right. Jonathan Carter was a perfectionist, a man of order, routine, and precision. Everything about his life was meticulously planned. So why hadn't he called his wife when he got home and found the front door wide open? Why had he waited until authorities called him before showing any sign of distress? And then there was the biggest question of all. Why was there no evidence of forced entry? The following days unraveled more than anyone had expected. By April 12th, surveillance footage from the neighborhood was reviewed. The Carter residence was quiet all night, except for a brief moment at 12:17 a.m. when a figure silently entered the house. There were no broken windows, no signs of picking locks. Whoever entered that house had a key. By April 16th, forensic teams had analyzed the blood spatter patterns in the bedroom. The evidence told a clear story. Evelyn had been attacked in bed, tried to flee, and was struck near the mirror. The final blow came as she collapsed. The injuries weren't random. They were controlled, methodical, as if inflicted by someone who understood the human body. And Jonathan Carter was a surgeon. By April 20th, 2011, it was no longer a question of if he had done it. It was a matter of proving it beyond doubt. Investigators had his alibi falling apart, his behavior raising suspicion, and most damning of all, his wife's secret phone records. The missed calls Evelyn had received between 1:07 a.m. and 3:42 a.m. were traced back to a single number. When investigators dialed it, the voice that answered wasn't her husband's. The arrest came swiftly. Jonathan Carter, 38, was charged with first-degree murder on the evening of April 20th, 2011. As he was led away in handcuffs, he kept his head down, silent. His face showed no emotion. By then, the media had caught wind of the case. The once respected surgeon was now the center of a national scandal. The perfect marriage, the perfect life. It had all been a lie. But the question still lingered in the air, haunting those who followed the case. Why did he do it? To answer that, one had to go back to the months leading up to the murder, back to the secrets and betrayals that had turned a marriage into a ticking time bomb. In the beginning, everything about Jonathan and Evelyn Carter looked perfect. They were the kind of couple people admired, the ones who walked into a room and turned heads, the ones who looked like they had everything figured out. Together they built a life that others envied, one filled with luxury, success, and the illusion of happiness. They met in September 2003 at a medical conference in Chicago. Jonathan had been invited as a keynote speaker, a rising name in orthopedic surgery, a man whose career was as polished as his appearance. Evelyn had attended as a guest, tagging along with a friend who was in the fitness and wellness industry. She hadn't expected much from the trip, but the moment she saw him standing on stage, confident and precise with his words, something about him fascinated her. Jonathan noticed her too. Maybe it was her energy, the way she carried herself with such ease, the way she didn't seem overly impressed by his success like so many others. She was different. She had a kind of light in her that drew people in, and for the first time in a long while he felt like he wanted to chase something outside of his career. By December 2003, their relationship had turned serious. Jonathan, already well into his career at 32, knew exactly what he wanted, and he wanted Evelyn. She was 24, still growing into her own ambitions, but when he proposed to her in the summer of 2004, there was never any hesitation. They married in April 2005, a wedding straight out of a fairy tale, coastal venue, candlelit reception and a guest list filled with high-profile surgeons, medical executives, and Evelyn's closest friends from her fitness world. Their life together was a picture of success and beauty. A sprawling 6-bedroom house in Pinebrook, Ohio, vacations in the French Riviera, private dinners in the finest restaurants. From the outside, it seemed like nothing could go wrong, but perfection has a way of cracking. By 2009, those cracks had started to show. Evelyn had once loved how driven Jonathan was, how dedicated he was to his career. But over the years, that drive had turned into something else, something colder. Jonathan didn't just love his job, he was obsessed with it. He had to be the best, the most respected, the one surgeon everyone turned to when no one else could fix a case. The long hours became longer. The late nights turned into weekends at the hospital. When he was home, he was exhausted, disconnected, barely acknowledging her presence. At first, Evelyn tried to be patient, to understand that she had married an ambitious man. But soon it felt like she was just another part of his perfect life checklist, something that needed to look good from the outside, but was ultimately neglected behind closed doors. And then there was his control. Jonathan liked things a certain way, the way the house was arranged, the way Evelyn dressed when they went to events, the kind of food she ate. At first, it seemed like small things, suggestions, preferences, but over time, those preferences became rules. Evelyn wasn't sure when it happened, but one day she woke up and realized she was walking on eggshells in her own home. By early 2010, she felt it. The loneliness, the growing resentment. Jonathan was so focused on his world, on his perfection, that he didn't see what was happening right in front of him. Evelyn had disappeared into the background of her own life, and then, in August 2010, she met Daniel Reyes. It had started with something simple, a need for change, a need to feel like she was in control of something. She had decided to join an exclusive gym in downtown Pinebrook, hoping to bring back the part of herself that felt lost. Daniel had been assigned as her personal trainer, a 30-year-old former college athlete, someone who lived and breathed fitness. He was warm, easy to talk to, and unlike Jonathan, he actually listened. At first, it was just training sessions, but the more time she spent around him, the more she realized how different he was from Jonathan. He noticed things about her, things Jonathan hadn't noticed in years. The way she liked to start her mornings with a run, the way she absent-mindedly played with the hem of her shirt when she was nervous, the way she stared off into space sometimes, lost in thoughts she could never say out loud. By October 2010, there was a shift. The way he looked at her, the way she looked at him, the way her heartbeat changed when he stood too close. It was undeniable, a pull that neither of them could ignore. By November, she had stopped ignoring it altogether. It started small, late-night texts, lingering touches, a stolen moment in the gym when no one was looking. It was dangerous, intoxicating, everything that had been missing from her life, and for the first time in years, Evelyn felt alive. But she wasn't as careful as she thought. Jonathan knew, and not all at once, not immediately, but Jonathan was a surgeon. He didn't miss details. The first thing he noticed was her phone. She had never been the type to be obsessed with texting. But suddenly her phone was always close, her eyes lighting up when a message came through. Then there was the way she dressed when she left for the gym. Before, she had always kept it casual. Now, she put extra effort into her appearance. The scent of a different cologne on her clothes, a smell that wasn't his, the small excuses, the sudden need to stay out late, the unexplained smiles to herself when she thought no one was watching. By December 2010, Jonathan's suspicions had turned into certainty. He didn't tell her he knew. He didn't confront her. Instead, he watched. By January 2011, he followed her. One night, Evelyn told him she was meeting a friend for dinner. Jonathan, always one to trust but never one to be fooled, left the hospital early and drove to the other side of town to a hotel parking lot. He didn't need to get close. He didn't need to hear their voices. All he had to do was look through the windshield. There they were, Evelyn and Daniel tangled together, kissing like the world didn't exist. Jonathan sat there for a long time, watching. He could feel his pulse in his ears, his heartbeat steady, controlled. He wasn't the kind of man who reacted without thought. No, Jonathan Carter was precise. He waited. He didn't tell her what he had seen. He didn't bring it up the next morning or the next week. Instead, he planned. Because if there was one thing Jonathan Carter never did, it was make mistakes. The night of April 5th, 2011 was quiet in Pinebrook, Ohio. The streets were still, houses dark, families asleep. But parked 2 streets away from 42 Cedar Lane, Jonathan Carter sat in his car, staring at the home that had once been his sanctuary. For months, he had waited for this moment. The night air was cold, pressing against the windshield. He kept the engine off, hands resting on his lap, his breath steady. He had replayed this scenario in his head too many times to count. Every detail had been considered, every possibility mapped out. There was no room for mistakes. At 11:35 p.m., the glow of a light flickered on from inside the house. Jonathan watched as Evelyn's silhouette moved through the upstairs window. A few moments later, her phone screen illuminated in the darkness. A call. Jonathan knew who it was. Daniel Reyes. For 10 minutes, Evelyn lay in bed, phone pressed to her ear, her voice too faint to reach the outside world. Jonathan didn't need to hear the words. He knew their meaning. He had known for months. The lie she lived, the secret she shared with another man. His grip tightened around the steering wheel. This would be the last time she spoke to Daniel Reyes. By 11:50 p.m., the house was silent again. The upstairs light had gone out, leaving only the dim glow from the street lamp casting long shadows across the driveway. This was it. At 12:15 a.m., Jonathan stepped out of his car. He didn't rush. He moved with the same calculated precision he had used in every surgery, every operation. His heartbeat remained even, his breathing controlled. He walked the short distance to the house, his own keys clutched tightly in his hand. Unlocking the door, he entered without a sound. The house welcomed him like a long-lost owner, the air still carrying the scent of the lavender candles Evelyn loved. He ignored it. There was only one thing left to do. Silently, he removed his shoes, placing them neatly by the door. The wooden staircase creaked slightly under his weight as he climbed, slow and deliberate, taking each step as if rehearsing the moment in his head. At 12:18 a.m., he stood in the doorway of the master bedroom. The moonlight stretched across the bed, illuminating Evelyn's sleeping figure. She was lying on her side, one arm draped over the pillow, her breathing soft and steady. Jonathan reached for the bedside lamp. At 12:19 a.m., the first strike landed. The heavy ceramic base crashed against Evelyn's skull, sending a sickening thud through the quiet of the room. Her body jolted, eyes snapping open, confusion and pain flashing in an instant. She barely had time to react before the second blow followed. At 12:20 a.m., she tried to move, tried to escape. She made it halfway off the bed before the force of the next strike sent her stumbling. The mirror behind her shattered, glass exploding around her as she collapsed onto the floor. Jonathan stepped over the broken shards, breathing slow, steady. She was still alive. At 12:21 a.m., the final blow landed. The sound of impact filled the room, then silence. Jonathan stood over her, his pulse never once faltering. He watched, absorbing the scene. His wife, the woman who had betrayed him, lay lifeless at his feet. The years of resentment, control, and disappointment had built to this very moment, and now it was done. But his job wasn't over yet. With the precision of a man who had spent his entire life ensuring perfection, he moved to stage the scene. He pulled the silk bedsheet from the mattress and carefully draped it over her lower body as if she had been sleeping when an intruder struck. He knocked over a jewelry box, opened a drawer, and left it slightly ajar. Subtle details, just enough to suggest a burglary gone wrong, but not enough to fool the right people. At 1 a.m., Jonathan left. He stepped through the back door, careful not to leave footprints, and walked the same quiet streets he had arrived on. He drove miles away to a construction site where he disposed of his blood-stained clothes, the shattered lamp base, and the gloves he had worn. By the time he returned home, he was already a grieving husband. By 6:42 a.m., the police arrived. Jonathan's plan had been perfect in theory, but theory and reality rarely align. His first mistake had been underestimating technology. By April 8, 2011, the investigation had already started to close in on him. Detectives had questioned neighbors, friends, and colleagues, piecing together a timeline of Evelyn's final hours. Jonathan had provided his alibi, a long shift at the hospital, but something didn't add up. By April 12th, security footage from Pinebrook Memorial Hospital was reviewed. Jonathan had never arrived for his shift. There was no record of him entering the hospital, no patient logs, no surgical reports. By April 14th, cell phone records were pulled. His phone had been near his home during the exact time frame of the murder. He had lied. By April 16th, surveillance cameras from the construction site miles away revealed a grainy image of a man disposing of a bundle into a dumpster at 1:30 a.m., just after Evelyn's estimated time of death. And then there was Daniel Reyes. By April 18th, investigators connected the 14 missed calls to Daniel's phone number. When questioned, Daniel's initial shock and grief gave way to nervous hesitation. It didn't take long before he confessed to the affair. By April 20th, 2011, the evidence was overwhelming. Jonathan Carter was arrested for the murder of his wife. The trial began in February 2012, and the media latched onto every detail. The respected orthopedic surgeon, the perfect marriage, the secret affair, the violent murder. It was a story that gripped the nation. Prosecutors painted Jonathan as a controlling husband who snapped the moment he realized he was losing control. The evidence was undeniable. His broken alibi, the surveillance footage, the cell phone data, the motive. 6 weeks later, the jury reached a verdict. By March 2012, Jonathan Carter was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. The world moved on, but the people left behind never truly did. Daniel Reyes left Pinebrook. Consumed with guilt, he abandoned everything, unable to look at himself in the mirror, knowing his love affair had set these events in motion. Evelyn's family turned their grief into action. By 2013, they had created a foundation in her name, an organization dedicated to helping women in toxic, controlling relationships. And Jonathan Carter, the once celebrated surgeon, the man who had built a life on precision and control, was now just another inmate. He sat in a maximum security prison, now known only as Prisoner Hash 42,937. He spent his days writing letters, filing appeals, claiming innocence. But the evidence spoke louder than his words. The world had already made its decision. This case left everyone with a bitter thought. What drives a man to murder the woman he once vowed to love forever? Was it jealousy, rage, a desperate need for control? Perhaps in Jonathan Carter's mind, Evelyn was never a woman, just a possession he refused to lose. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on our daily updates, and check out another insane case we have, the case where a husband kills himself and his family after he finds out his wife cheated on him. Make sure to check it out and let us know your thoughts in the comment section.